Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Polity's podcast. I'm very excited to be here with Joseph Hobbs. He goes by Hobbs, and he's here from Kansas City. Hello.
Hey, Mark.
Why is he here? That's the question. Well, I think chatbots are evil. It's something I've said. It's something that I've said at slightly louder volumes and slightly more mumbly volumes, depending on the people who are around. But I do believe this. I believe this to be true. But it's not exactly convincing everyone. I understand that. So one of the things that I recently did is in making an argument that I think chatbots are evil, I asked if anyone disagrees. And if there's anyone who sees holes in this particular argument, please come to Steubenville and debate me. And Hobbs said, challenge accepted, and actually came down to Steubenville, which is just, I can't express the gratitude I feel that you would do that for me. Thank you. Is this something you regularly do? Are you hopping on podcasts and
No.
Okay.
No. I travel for conferences and things a fair bit, but not for podcasts.
For the sake of our viewers and in a real way, for the sake of me, who just got to know you last night, you got to come to a potluck, but that's about the most I've seen of you, which, you know how potlucks are. A lot of children running around. It's only so much attention one can give. Just tell folks a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
Sure.
What are you up to?
Excuse me, I'm Hobbs. I work in Grandview, outside of Kansas City. I work for a company called Databricks. My technical job title, which is a nonsense term, is Senior Solution Architect.
That's how I feel every morning. Right?
Yeah. All that means is that I draw the blueprints for data and AI platforms.
Okay.
Right. I'm the guy figuring out how all the parts and pieces come together for various companies.
Yeah. So companies ask you, they give you their goals.
Yeah.
And you say, I have the means. It's these AI described powers, and I will help form it into a system that's useful for you that attains those goals.
Right. Yep.
That sounds useful.
Yeah. So it's been good. I've enjoyed it. The thing that draws me to my job is I really like helping people understand things, and I like helping them. And this is a really nice intersection of that.
Yeah.
And technology, which I have always sort of geeked out about.
Yeah. Marvelous. Well, I think let's not, as much as I'd love to use this particular format just to get to know people, because conversation is a great joy. We won't wear the time down with that. We'll get to it. We don't have a plan, by the way, folks. We briefly discussed the possibility of setting up a sort of formal debate where we debate the proposition. But I think, as we'll probably find out, we'll see, we have so much in common that it seemed that it would be more helpful to have a slightly more open conversation. But this is a debate in the sense that I'm going to hold the proposition here, and then Hobbs here is going to tackle it and point out some flaws, that sort of thing. And of course, we need to say a quick hello to Elijah, who is
Elijah,
Hobbs' brother here, who is responsible for the connection as well, and we're really grateful for him and all our readers at New Polity, which reminds me at this juncture to say we have a wonderful magazine. You should subscribe to New Polity's magazine. We have an issue devoted to AI where a lot of these ideas are addressed in research and writing, and you can go buy that issue right now, newpolity.com/magazine. Okay, that's the pitch. I've done my duty. So I think AI chatbots are evil. And when I say evil, I'm actually trying to be pretty specific and not say I think that they are gloomy, scary, and demonic or something like that. I mean in the strict sense that they do something, or they are designed to do something that is contrary to our nature as human beings. The way that I formulate the argument, just to get us started here, is that acts, the things we do, have ends. We act for an end. They have a purpose, and that it is wrong to deliberately frustrate an act from attaining its end, from attaining its purpose. I've used several examples before. Maybe one that's particularly obvious would be, I've used the example of bulimia, where the act of eating is frustrated from attaining the end of nourishment. Obviously, within the Catholic tradition, we're very familiar with the idea that the act of sex has procreation as one of its ends, and it's wrong to perform the marital act while deliberately frustrating it from attaining its end. And so when it comes to chatbots, I am simply applying, at some level, the the principle there to a specific case. So I'm saying it seems to me that these machines are designed to elicit from us acts of conversation, to elicit conversing in such a manner that we are listening and open to another intelligence. And in the same moment that they elicit these acts, they frustrate them from attaining their end, obviously because there's not, in fact, a person. There's not a someone. As you are very aware, and in a intimate way through your work, and as most people are aware just as a kind of background knowledge that we apply to the case, it's just a machine. It's generated text that's or speech that's through pattern recognition techniques applied to very large data amounts of textual data, pattern recognition and pattern generation. But the appearance is as a someone, and in the design of chatbots in particular, there's the effort to make it an effort by design by the designers and producers of the machines to make them appear as much of a someone as possible. Okay, so putting that all together, I'd say if it's wrong that we deliberately frustrate an act from attaining its end, and if the act of conversation is deliberately frustrated in the use of a chatbot, then the only kind of missing thing that belongs here is what is the end of an act of conversation? What's the purpose? What's it for? And I think simply, though there's perhaps ways to be even clearer and to define it more carefully, I think that communion with another person is the end of conversation, of this particular act of the human being. And where that act is elicited, but the end is impossible to attain, you have just strictly speaking, a frustrated act. And so because of that, I think that the design of chatbots is wrong. Like, one should not make a chatbot or a machine that operates on the basis of eliciting conversation from people. And then I also think that not just the design, but the use of chatbots is wrong. I think one ought not to do it. And I think I'll leave it there, because that's sort of and you know how these things go. When you make an argument, you're already arguing with a whole bunch of other possible interpretations. But what's amazing is that you came here full of just willingness to give of yourself and to have this conversation, so that I don't have to imagine the various possible counter arguments and counter examples and such. Thank you.
Yeah, no, happy to be here.
Thanks, Hobbs.
So there's a few pieces. I think I disagree with almost all of your points.
Yeah.
But let's take them apart.
Yeah, please.
The first one has to do. I want to talk about conversation some, and then communion as well.
Totally.
And the design of chatbots and some other things. I'm not necessarily here on the pro AI or chatbot perspective. I have deep concerns about things.
Sure.
But I don't think making it a moral axiom is going to be very helpful, unless it's quite accurate.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, there's a risk there.
So, as a random statistic, OpenAI did some research, and they opened up to a research firm, anonymized data from their chatbots. They have 800 million weekly active users now, which is insane.
Yeah.
Right. So the speed with which we have moved into this arena, I think, is very concerning.
Sure.
Okay, so I got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in communication. So when I think about conversation, my mind goes back to those textbooks. So if you don't mind, let me walk through how I think about conversation.
The floor is yours.
At the basic level, I think a perfectly acceptable definition for conversation is people talking. I don't know that we need something necessarily more complicated than that, right? If we went all around the world, most everyone would be like, is a conversation people talking? And they would say yes. Mm-hmm. So as common sense as we can keep it. Then there's the how do people talk? And this is in these textbooks, you end up with the diagram where you've got a person and they have thoughts in their head. And the thoughts in their head, you can't just telepathically communicate. You have to put them into something. So from the thoughts in a person's head and whatever goal they have, they put those into hand gestures and facial expressions and all of that and words, and that gets sent across to the other person. They use the word encoding for this because you're taking a thought and putting it into a physical form. that goes through this layer of misinterpretation where they talk about noise and stuff, but I don't think we need to go through that. The other person, the receiver, then takes this, they have to decode it. What did that hand gesture mean? What did that tone of voice mean? Did it match with the words themselves? And they make meaning out of whatever the first person sent across. And they receive that, and then if it's a conversation, it goes back again. If it's one way, that's communication. If it's two-way, that's conversation.
Okay.
All good?
I disagree, but I don't think it's the time to do that.
Okay, all right.
So, but I've made a very informative note to myself on this little piece of paper.
Okay.
Keep going.
Normally then, when we talk about kinds of conversation, they use sort of like an X and a Y axis, where they'll say all conversation varies from low information to high information and low relationship to high relationship. So you can't go to zero on information or relationship or it's not a conversation anymore. It's something else at that point, right? So if you have a really high relationship, really low information conversation, that's when you're shooting the breeze and you're laughing and you're having a great time and you feel connected to people. But if you ask what you talked about, nobody knows or cares because that's not the point. The information is sort of irrelevant. So you're at 1% information, 99% relationship. Totally. On the opposite side, if you've got 99% information, 1% relationship, that's things like HR departments communicating with one another, where they're doing everything in their power to keep the personal out of it, right? And there's other combinations, high information, high relationship. That's when you and your girlfriend have to sit down and have a define the relationship talk, right? Where it's very important that there's lots of information going back and forth and it's very relational information at the same time. Low information, low relationship, that's when you go to the gas station and say, can I have $10 on pump one? And they say, yep, you're good. And you say goodbye. Right? So this is sort of, and there's all these mixes of these things, but you can't drop either piece. The last piece here is that for the most part, people are interacting as people, but as people in roles. And those roles are often a really dominant part of any given conversation.
Sure, absolutely.
So cashier, right? They have a role. If they suddenly disappeared and someone else came in, right? You're basically interacting with the role. There is a personal element. And if you go to the same gas station, the personal element grows and grows and grows. So you can never get to 0% relationship, but it's mostly the role of the cashier and the role of the customer that are interacting there. So this is how I think about conversation. So I agree that I might swap out the word communion with relationship, just because it's a simpler word. But I would add in that you also cannot drop information. It's a small change to your argument, but it's reductive in a way that I don't think is good to say that it is the only really essential element is relationship.
It's reductive to say that the only end of conversation is relationship.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's correct. I don't think it's the only end. When I say that it's the final end or the purpose of the act, I mean that it is it's what allows its possibility of attaining that is what allows that act to be. Like there's human beings speak, dogs don't, cats don't. What is it about the human being that enables speech? Now, obviously, that's not a question that we're going to just solve here. It's a very difficult one, but I'm trying to express that the ability to be in communion with each other, for the two to become one, to become of one mind, to share our lives with each other, is a capacity we have because of the kinds of creatures we are, because we're spiritual and rational beings. And we have a power as a result of the kind of creatures we are that we can certainly use for other ends. I'm just trying to get a bagel, right? So that's an end, and I utilize conversation for that end. But the reason I can use conversation and I'm not limited to just grabbing the bagel, say, is because of of having the capacity to attain the end, which conversation is for, namely that I can commune with another person in the sense of I can share myself with them, they can share themselves with me in dialogue, in a way in which what's interior becomes exterior, similar to what you were describing. So maybe one way to help think about what I mean is that I think that there is some communion always attained between two when they are talking with each other, when there's conversing going on.
How is that different from saying that on a scale from 0 to 100, like you can't go to 0 on the relationship side of things?
I don't think it's necessarily different. I think, though, that what seems to be important is what I'm trying to argue is that the reason you can never go to 0 is because conversation always is communion. It always is a openness to the other as another. And you can't subtract that and still have the phenomenon. You can't subtract that and still have the act. You can't have language without that governing possibility that the other can be known by you and that you can be in a relationship.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, though, is that's true. You can't go to 0 on relationship because of the kinds of creatures we are. Yeah. Like you also can't get to 0 on the information exchange, basically. Right? Any encounter with a person, there's going to be some marginal bit of information that goes back and forth if there are words involved. If people are talking, right, yeah, some information moves. Yeah. But we're just defining conversation at that point. Conversation is these two things in relationship to one another using words between people. Mm-hmm.
But I think it's not correct to say that conversation is the conveying of a thought and then an encoding it in speech and then a delivery of it to the other person. I think that seems to be more like an analogous way of describing human conversation on the basis of what machines can do, and in some ways on the basis of, let's just say, machines, I think, computers and such. But I think it is an analogy that limps when then applied to what we're doing when we're conversing. What I mean is this, and this is always a terrible thing to do because it's very awkward, I find, to describe conversation in a conversation. Sure. Because it leads to a certain self-awareness, which is never helpful to just natural behavior. So I apologize for that. But the fact is I don't have anything in my head when I then articulate the words that I'm articulating right now. There is no reservoir. There is no prearranged bit. There is nothing. I mean, there's certainly a goal, and there's certainly, I can then post facto in the conversation describe myself as having this full thought and then putting it to speech and giving it to you, but that's not what's happening. I have no idea what word is going to come out next as I'm speaking them. And I am as much motivated by the fact that you and I shouldn't say motivated, I should say that what makes it conversation as opposed to, say, just a thought or memorization and repetition or something like that, is that you are drawing from me my speech. When you nod, when you say, it moves me along. If you begin to frown, if you begin to shake your head, then I'm going to be shifting my words as they come in real time, in present moment. Why? Because the act of conversation, it seems to me, is always a putting yourself before the other, beginning to give of yourself in speech, but that speech is always ready to change. It always has this quality of being available to moving in a different direction. And we even describe conversation like this, that as if it's a road and then it turns this way, which we don't necessarily expect. Or you just consider the fact that you often have the experience of learning what it is that you think and what you believe in the act of conversation, not prior. Not like, I've got these thoughts, I express them. You've got these thoughts, you express them, I modify, and we go back and forth. Mm-hmm. That seems to me a good explanation of communication systems. I don't think the human person is a communication system. I think communication systems are built on the basis of what human persons are, in the same way that all technology is an extension of some human power, and so it has similarities on that basis, but that's not what we're doing. Which is, again, to point to the paramount nature of the purpose of all conversation, which I think is communion, because what the actual experience of conversing with someone is being in touch with them in such a way that the words are not that the speech is formed by them, it's drawn forth by them, it's changed by them. And when I speak, I'm listening. My speech is vulnerable to being changed in accordance with what you say and where we go. And this is something I think unique and distinct from the idea of an exchange of thoughts that exist inside and then receive a kind of coded exterior expression. Does that kind of distinction make sense between the communication system and the human person?
I mean, kind of. There are other elements to the diagram that I left out for simplicity. One of them is the feedback loop, which is receiving whatever the user is. The receiver is sending you in their body posture. When you cross your arms, what does that say about what you're thinking? Mm-hmm. Right, those kinds of things.
But you might make a distinction in something like a chatbot when, for the human person who's engaged in the act of conversation, you are in the present moment. This is, well, maybe an example will help. So one of the things that, one of the particular designs of chatbots is speech. So the actual audible, things you can speak with using your mouth. And one of the ways that they found to make these sorts of chatbots more conversational and more natural feeling, and at the end of the day, more convincingly like talking with another person, was to add things like, like,
sure, yep,
oh, interesting, let me think of, okay, all these stutters and hesitations of speech. Now look, people designing chatbots are just saying, well, human beings do this, so we should do this too. I mean, I think that's the end of story. I don't think there's any malicious thought going on. But it does, in a wonderful way, bring up the question, why is that? Why is it the case that hesitations and filler words and sounds and grunts of affirmation are actually necessary to a natural conversation? I don't know if you've ever had this experience where if you don't say enough times, someone asks, are you listening? Where, of course, listening is as much a part of a conversation as speaking. And when you speak, you are listening with your whole being to the other person's response as you speak. And you have to give evidence of it, right? And this can be misused because you can just say, And if you do it too much, then they'll also accuse you of not listening because you're being robotic about it. Okay. So the point is, why? Why does this happen? And it seems to me from a purely the feedback loop thing is helpful, but it seems to me from the perspective of communication theory, all of these ums and likes and such seem to be a certain failure to communicate, right? Like the thing is in you, you try to encode it in speech, but you fail to in some way. But the result of having them is the naturalness and human, or the convincingness of it being a human conversation, which is why they add it to chatbots. And it is very convincing, actually, when someone calls me and says, as they say, I've been pre-approved for a $20,000 loan. I think I'm really talking to someone. Well, I think you probably see where I'm driving at here. I think it's because of the in-person vulnerability of speech as it's used in conversation, that it is not speech that is ready-made, and it is not speech that knows where it's going. It's speech that is always in communion with the other person as it's being spoken. And so shows the indeterminacy of the thought, of the language as it's being formed.
Sure. It
shows the hesitation, gives a proof of the authenticity of the person, because we know we're speaking with a person when they give evidence of being in a kind of waiting or listening position towards our own presence.
They're
like
the receiver, and they're actively receiving.
Right, they're actively receiving in time, which is obviously not really happening when you're conversing with a chatbot, obviously, which is why this has to be added in. But I think because of that distinct nature of human communication, I think that communion is always governing the act of conversation. That the fact that the two are connected is what allows speech to operate in that manner. Whereas if they were not connected, they could still operate as a receiver and a sender, right? So I could...
You mean like writing letters back and forth?
Sure, or just saying, or just to say that something besides conversation could happen, right? Like I could write a letter. I could have a way of communicating to you that isn't intentional, but I could give a command, for instance, and have at the very least no intention for it to be a conversation in the sense of my words are not open to change,
right?
That sort of thing.
Well, that seems to me like you've now gone to maybe a command is something like zero. You've gone to zero relationship, so it's not a conversation anymore.
Yes,
right?
I do.
We've stepped out of the definition of conversation into another thing.
Have you ever had this with a kid where you've told them this is not a conversation?
Yeah, once or twice.
Yeah, I think there's but I think there's something funny about that. Maybe this is maybe this will lead us too far afield in some ways, but I think that even in command, insofar as you're commanding another person, it is a conversation. And there's a reason why you have to say things like, this is not a conversation, you are going to bed, or something like that. Because that openness to the other person's response and that vulnerability of our words to them, to their person, to their circumstance, that ability for the conversation to shift and change has to be almost artificially curtailed.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's bad to artificially curtail it.
So what is your definition of conversation then?
Sometimes I call it listening speech, but that's probably not very helpful. My definition of conversation is, I'm going to make it up right now.
People talking you don't feel is a sufficient definition.
Of course it is. I think it is sufficient.
Okay.
But I think that people talking is very mysterious, and it's not just. It doesn't necessarily satisfy the analysis that's possible on itself.
Sure.
So what I mean is, I think that what you have to have conversation, right, is maybe this is helpful, maybe not. Etymologically, conversation. It's from the Latin conversare. Sorry, I think it's passive, and it means a turning with. So come with, and then versare, turning, bending, that sort of thing. I'm not saying because it's etymological, it's true. That's silly, but there is this sense of when you are in conversation, right? The two are joined. And they are turning with, they are moving with, they are bending with each other.
Yeah,
it's using
a back and
language.
Forth.
It is a back and forth, but what I want to, I think I accept that. It's a back and forth, a tete-a-tete, argy-bargy, a dialogue, dialogos, the two becoming one in this third thing we call the conversation. But I want to be clear that a back and forth does not mean that two individuals then simply exchange things back and forth in a exchange relationship that you could basically explain physically, but that
maybe it has a spiritual.
Well, it's spiritual just I'm not trying to mystify it. I'm just saying that when I speak, in the act of speaking, it is back and forth in the sense of it is an openness to the response in real time, and it changes on its basis. And that okay, so if I had to just give it a definition, I would say that that conversation is a use of speech for the sake, or use of speech that intends the other to understand, and is always open to the response of the other in the speaking of it.
Sure, but again, that sounds like information and relationship to me.
Well, sure, okay, and then maybe we can just say that in that case, that what we've accomplished here, if there's been an accomplishment, is to speak about what's described in information theory, and then to describe it phenomenologically in the sense that to avoid the misunderstanding of a conversation as just an interior completed thought that then is sent, received, and responded to as another completed interior thought that goes back. So just giving it a thicker,
much more organic and
thicker description there.
Real than a machine sending a message, receiving it, and sending it back. It's a real meeting of people in the middle.
Yeah.
As they try to take who they are and send it and convey that to another person and receive what the other person is.
Yeah, because people have interiors that can include the other person in a way that a machine doesn't have an interior that includes the other machine that it's communicating with. So two machines might be described as communicating, but that's not true within the machines themselves. It's not true that they have the receiver. I mean, obviously, because they don't have an interior in the sense of a consciousness. Right. So I think that when I say that the end of conversation, the purpose of conversation is communion, I'm not saying that the purpose is somehow that every conversation you have is just this deep, informationless, heart-to-heart that you feel or something like that. I'm just saying that the act doesn't exist except for that human beings can commune with each other by having the other within themselves in this unique way.
Yeah.
Okay.
I suppose if I could rephrase that some, I don't want to spend too much time with definitions because I think they're the least interesting part of most debates.
Well, and it's mysterious.
But it's necessary, right?
It is, yes.
I lost my train of thought.
No more definitions.
Okay, so no more definitions. So the second aspect of this, the reason I brought it up, what is conversation, is I've been trying to think carefully about what machine-human communication looks like, right? And I've been trying to walk it up in sort of levels of complexity. So the most basic example I can find of machine-human communication, have you ever had a butterball turkey?
Yep.
You know those little thermometer things that are in them, right? It's got the red dot, and when it gets hot enough, the red thing pops up, and now the machine communicates to me, the inside of my turkey is done, I can eat it.
Totally.
Yeah? And there's the designer, right? The person who makes the machine says, I'm an intelligence, I want to communicate something helpful to the people who use this machine. So they design the little thermometer, make millions of them, and then whoever uses that thing gets this useful piece of information. That, I think, is the simplest, it's a yes, no, is the red button up or down, but still some kind of a machine has communicated information to me. And it goes all the way up to the other end, so walking it up, then you've got something like one of those outlet plugs, testers, where you plug it into an outlet in the wall and it's got 3 lights, one if the outlet is fine, one if the ground wire is disconnected, one if there's a fault of some kind in the electrical. Again, designer builds a machine to communicate information to me through the machine, even though they're not present.
Yeah.
And it goes up and up and up. If you use a word processor and it underlines a word for you, right? And you click on it and it gives you a list of spellings because you did something wrong, or you can go to the thesaurus, right? The machine is communicating information to me. At that point, or do you remember Clippy? Yeah? Okay. Clippy, the little paperclip avatar with the eyeballs, who I remember this in grade school. You type in "Dear Bob" and you hit a comma, and Clippy pops up and it says, "Looks like you're writing a letter. Would you like to format this in these ways?" Yeah. And you could say yes, and you could have this very short interchange with Clippy. And then now I'm writing code as part of my job, and I write some code. Usually the way most people who write code now are working in these ideas of notebooks, which is just you write a small batch of code, you receive the output from that small batch, and then you do that again and again, referencing the prior steps. More Lego-like rather than monolithic. So I write some code that sends information to the computer. Computer says, "Hey, this is wrong. Right? Here's the error message." Okay, so I change it, and I move on, and then I did something right, but it's not what I expected. So then what don't I understand about this function? I have to go out and find the information about that function. And I'm now in this back and forth between me and the machine. But again, the machine is conveying the information to the people who built these Python libraries in the background. All the way up to now chatbots, right? Where a chatbot is this thing, this machine which sits in the middle between me and the person who created it. And in this case, it's like the person who created it and the body of knowledge upon which it was created, both of which are human. And then the machine conveys to me that information. So what I'm not able to find, right, is some nice boundary line between what's machine-human communication and what's machine-human conversation, other than a movement towards relationship.
I think that's right, yeah.
Which, as kind of my final argument here, is I don't think we should focus on the medium, whether it's conversation or communication or text messages or speech. What seems to be the thing which is probably morally wrong is when you try to have a person-to-person relationship with a machine, whatever that machine might be.
Fair.
But that would take it out of the realm of conversation being the thing which is the immoral part.
Well, I agree that it's wrong to have a person-to-person relationship with something that's not a person. So that would be a very broad category that I could agree with.
Yeah.
And there's lots of things that populate that category. So I think it would be wrong to have a large pillow as your girlfriend.
Yeah.
I think it would be wrong to treat your dog like your kid.
Yep.
I think it would be wrong to use a Ouija board and ask it questions about the future.
Yeah.
So I don't want I don't want anyone to think that there's just some like particular hang up on the tech side of things. I think like all sorts of ways of getting this wrong. But if conversation is essentially related to the presence of the other person, so if it's true that you do not have the act of conversation outside of positing the other person, not just as a sort of outside extrinsic fact that I'm talking to another person, but in the very act, I am speaking to someone, speaking with someone. I am turning with them. Then it doesn't seem to me that you could have a machine that operates in and through eliciting acts of conversation that does not invite you to treat it as a person in a way that I think is I think that would just be always a problem of such a machine.
Sorry, to step back again.
Please.
You said that letter writing is not conversation.
Well, no, I don't actually think that. I think it is conversation.
I think it is too.
And but it stretches it over time in a way that's really interesting, and it can be more easily used as not conversation. So what do I mean? Again, I don't think that the kind of speech that is to someone can be anything but conversation. I think that's the nature of speaking to someone, is that you are positing them as intelligent and as having an interior that understands, that receives not just the information, but also in some way you in the information within themselves. And that you can't simply speak to someone otherwise. Now, there are ways to sin in conversation, in the sense of I can speak to you as if you didn't have an interior. I can desire for my words to operate on you as a billiard ball, and then be frustrated by you when you speak back in some way. Okay, but to your question, sorry, I lost it a little bit. The question was then, is letter writing conversation? Well, yeah, I think it is, but it's stretched over time. So you have the letter that you send, you are expressing yourself to the other person. When they receive it and they're writing to you, and so their words are imagining your reception of them in the very act of writing them and discerning them. But of course, it is drastically slowed down and can lend itself to artifice in a way that human speech, this person-to-person thing, tends to make it more clear, the conversational reality more clear, because in letter writing, for instance, I could very easily cut off the expression of my person and and just try to write like copy pasted hackneyed phrases and then send them to someone. All of them were copied from a little book of how to impress a woman. And I copied them all and I put them in a letter and I send it to them and they read it. And there, I think I'm working against the nature of conversation because that person is reading it.
It's kind of lie.
It's a lie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the person is reading it with the expectation that we're in a sort of communion where the words I say have been at some level drawn from a communion with, in this case, her, right? But in fact, what I'm doing is drawing them from this little book that I found for the sake of certain results. And the reason that someone would be offended and hurt to find that, oh, he didn't really send me conversations. He just copied this out of a book. He wasn't really talking to me. He was copying what I said into ChatGPT, asking for good responses and pasting it back. The reason they would be upset is because the nature of conversation is being thwarted. That communion is being proffered. It's appearing. But in the very act of appearing, it's also being frustrated in attaining its end. You're not really in communion with the person you thought you were in communion with when you're writing letters back and forth, that sort of thing.
It's like I have a hard time following the way you're using conversation, which is part of why I wanted to talk about the definition at the beginning. And the reason I wanted a good definition is because it seems to me that what most people are doing probably shouldn't be called conversation when they're working with chatbots. That might unfortunately need a new word because this is such a weird time to be alive. So, like, to some extent, there is communion with the person who builds the machine, whether it's the turkey thermometer or anything else. Sure. I can appreciate
there's a relationship.
There's some relationship to, like, thank you, Bob, for making this turkey thermometer. I now know that this thing is done.
Well, that's sort of true, but Bob isn't present to you.
I know, that's true. So it's not conversation.
Yeah, the other person has to be present.
But there is, in the same sense that I can read a book and have some sort of connection to the author of the book or to their mind.
I think
through a machine,
right.
I can have some sort of connection to the creator of the machine and the information they are conveying to me through the medium of the machine.
Yeah, but a book isn't a conversation either.
Agreed. Okay. It's not.
Because there is no openness to or intention of the other person as living and speaking back.
Right. Yep.
Openness to a response is absolutely fundamental. It's essential to the act.
Good. So, like, yes, some kind of communication. No, not some kind of conversation.
Sure.
Yeah. Right? Because communication is one way.
Yeah.
So when we get into Word document editing, right, or Clippy or those things, we are now in a back and forth way of retrieving information from machines.
That's correct.
That I don't think is conversation. I don't think conversation is the right way to talk about it.
Well, I don't think, for instance, it's the right way to talk about like a Google search, right? So if I'm issuing a command to a machine and not intending any other, there's nothing in my act that intends that other as listening, as capable of response, as a center of intelligence which can generate a response that reveals a who to me. So query, command, theater also, I think, is a good example of this, where, and I think it's a lot of what we're doing. Like I don't posit the reality of the person in communion with me when I'm watching them on a TV screen or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that all speech is conversation, but I think that with things like Clippy, there is no one who in the use of it, because it's the transparency of the interface as a machine seems to nullify the possibility of positing a other intelligence in our acts of operating Clippy, for instance.
And if chatbots had that same transparency, would you be comfortable with them then?
Yeah,
morally?
although I think they wouldn't be chatbots. So the formal thing that would have to happen, right, is that the use of the machine would have to be it would have to not present itself as something that listens and responds in the way that human beings listen and respond. But the design of chatbots is for the sake of having...
Right. They're designed to take in and put out language.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're designed to do. So you think that's an immoral design, to have a machine which takes in and puts out language?
Not necessarily, but I think there's ways of taking in and putting out that that elicit from us acts of conversing, where we're speaking as if to someone and receiving as if from someone, and that all of that human vulnerability to the other is present in our speech that we give. And then there's ways of a back and forth that we understand it to not be indicative of like it's present, or it's clear that it's not coming from another who speaks, coming from an intelligence. I don't think there's like a clear line, like do this or that. I can tell you the sort of far end. It's like, well, I think that insofar as we are just trying explicitly to make conversation as the form of the machine's operation. So we want to make these conversational. We want to add all of these human quirks of speech. We want to refer to the thing that's speaking to you as an I, using the pronouns, and we want to add to the input and output a sort of personality and a character type and a delayed response, so that it appears that the thing is thinking or even saying, let me think about that and get back to you, all this stuff. I think it conspires all together to produce from us a relationship that I think is frustrated. Like our conversation is wasted upon a stone in some ways.
Okay, but that's close to the point that I want to make, which is that the issue is the relationship. Like that's probably where the focus should be, not necessarily on at what point have I moved from a Clippy-like interaction with a machine to a debugging a bunch of code interaction with a machine to some other line where now I am using a full sentence in English to do something with a machine.
Yeah.
Right. But rather to say at the point where a person begins to relate in a person-to-person like way, that's the line.
Yeah, but I think there are acts of, I think I agree in the sense of when you are relating to it as if a person, then you're wrong and ought not to do that. But I think that the act of conversation itself is a relating to another person, is a way of relating to another person.
Which is why I'm saying I don't think it's a conversation. I think it's a human-machine communication, but not a conversation.
Of course it is, but it is
right?
a human-machine communication which is designed to appear as conversation. What I mean is this, like you seem to be describing maybe imagine a guy who believes that he is speaking with a person, maybe over Zoom, and he's interviewing for a tech job or something. And he's talking about it, he's telling it things about himself, and then halfway through, maybe he's 10 minutes in, he realizes, no, this is not a person. This is in fact a machine that is designed to appear as a person. It's a chatbot. Okay. What does he change? So if all we're going to say is, well, he just knows, all it's necessary is that he knows that it's a chatbot, and that's sufficient. His acts can stay the same, do the same thing, finish the thing. As long as he's aware or knows that he's not talking with a human being anymore, that fundamentally that's fine. I would disagree with that. I would say that the nature of his acts, right, were acts relating to a person. And now it's necessary that those acts change. So maybe an analogy would help. Do you like analogies for these sorts of things? So I'm trying to imagine this with another act, right? Because conversation is, I think, it is the most mysterious thing about people, actually. So it can be kind of hard in that sense. So I also think about worship as an act. So we worship God. And worship has an end, right? And we don't have to be like rigorous about it, we could say, well, worship is the praise. Right? Well, sure. I mean,
kind of the purpose of everything in the universe is
exactly. That's why it's such a hard thing to think of.
Part of why I push back on you using that, because it feels too vague to me.
Sure, it can be vague because of that, but I think that's actually the reason why chatbots are so vague. I mean, what I mean is they appear to respond, and they're marketed as responding to everything. They have a kind of promise, which I think is a lie, of fulfilling a universal and longing in man, which is for communion with others. I mean, there's a reason so many people use it for therapy. There's a reason why people are so vulnerable in their conversations to it. It's not because it's because the very form that it's eliciting from us is one that has our very deepest longings in. I shouldn't say in mind, but it is one that is drawing on our very deepest longings.
So I disagree with something there. So OpenAI worked with a research firm to analyze a bunch of their user data. Mm-hmm. I mentioned before they've got just a ridiculous number of weekly active users. I think that's terrifying. 800 million weekly active users. They then took all the conversations and they anonymized them, and they said, what kinds of things, let's categorize the kinds of interactions between people and chatbots. It was 49, I have to look these numbers up because I don't want to get them wrong. 49% was just information retrieval.
Sure.
Right? And then 40% was task completion.
Sure.
Right? And then 11% had any kind of emotional or expressional language in it. Mm. And of that 11%, 2% of that started to look something like a personal relationship. So it seems to me like that's the outlier. Most people are doing something that is more like machine-human communication, not conversation. Yeah. And then there's this small subset of people who are stepping past that into something relational they shouldn't.
Well, I wonder, though, because my issue with the chatbot in this regard is that there's several problems. Number one is that it is presented as changing, disrupting, scooping up, and then shifting all of our existing habits in our use of the internet, period.
Yep.
So it doesn't surprise me what you say at all, that the things that we use, things like Google for, would be the majority of the things that we are now using ChatGPT for. That's not my concern. And my question of the 2%, it's easy to imagine these as like, well, these are 11% and then down to 2, depending on how you look at it. These are the outliers in the sense of a number of people who just insanely use this thing in this immoral way. But what I'd be interested in, the data that I don't imagine is available, is it rather that people are constantly able to become that 2%, you know?
Okay, yeah.
Like in any other immoral act, it's similar, like pornography. Like pornography is pretty much the number one use of the internet. I mean, that's what people use it for. But the kind of, besides for like crazy addicts, I shouldn't say crazy. It's tough out there, boys. Sure. But besides for like a addiction, what I imagine one would see is that most people use the internet for work-related tasks, you know, for getting to their email, for pretty simple informational retrieval, as you mentioned. But then because of the nature of the internet as the form of life, the temptation of pornography is very near to them. And maybe 2% of that time, maybe 11% of that time, that's what they use it for. The nature of screen use itself, I think, is a temptation towards pornography because it's an alienating experience. It's an experience of living in a fake world. It's an experience of a certain being cut off from people who are nevertheless constantly presented to themselves. And so pornography has a certain temptation outside of the obvious that, you know, it's lust and all that. But it also has this temptation of like saving the person from the alienated experience of being online all the time by giving them something real, giving them something they can feel, giving them something that feels like touch, like personal communion. Yeah. And in an increasingly lonely world, it seems understandable that more and more people have normal internet use plus pornography. So my question then is not, given that it's scraped up our normal use of the internet to now be ChatGPT, My concern is that because of the form in which we are doing our informational retrieval, because this has been shifted, because the form in which we're doing our humdrum things, you can integrate your shopping to ChatGPT and tell it to buy this, that, or the other. The form in which we are now doing that is through commands that are as if spoken to another person who does what we want them to do, right? And I think that that's where the kind of what I would describe as a near occasion of sin lies. That we are, if I spend my day in this sort of very functional, I'm just using this thing, but I am aware that, if I also say, hey, I'm feeling kind of lonely, could you help me think about this situation? Give me three different practices that I could perform just to feel a little more in touch with my neighbors or something like that. That's always available to me now in a way that wasn't part of the very form of our informational searching and querying with prior technologies.
Sure. So I want to share a quote real quick.
Please.
This is, have you looked at what, I'm bad at Latin, Antiqua et Nova that the Vatican put out?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like 100 paragraphs long.
Yeah.
They had a quote in there from Georgios Bernanos.
Yes.
He said, "The danger is not in the multiplication of machines, but in an ever-increasing number of men accustomed from their childhood to desire only what machines can give."
Oh, wow.
Right? I was in 1946, and I thought that was prophetic, right? Because what you're describing, I agree with as far as screens go and the internet goes and social media goes. We have taught people to be content with the scraps under the table instead of being like, come to the feast, which is people, right? Which is God. I am thinking of my kids, right? I am much more comfortable teaching my kids to the extent that it's appropriate, to find out information online, to use a chatbot than I am to put them in a web browser.
Okay.
Right? I am totally going to say, like, we're gonna take classes on how to do good research and how to summarize and finding citations and all of these things. But I also intend to say, if you need to know something, don't go looking for it on Google Chrome, right? Because I'm very concerned from my own experience of early exposure to inappropriate material and the damage that has done, right? So I think this is better. I'm not saying that it's great.
Maybe in regards,
I think it's better than...
Sure, maybe in regards to the problem of unintended results, like the way that Google works is a multitude of search results, and maybe one is not the one that one was intending, and it has morally damaging consequences. I can see that as an improvement insofar as there's like a one-to-one, I ask this and I just get this response, as opposed to here, check through 10, 20
Yeah. And
results.
I do have concerns about which skills we delegate.
Well, it makes us stupider. I mean, that seems to be the problem.
Yeah. So going back to roles, right, which is this piece of the conversation definition that I started with, I think, okay, what's the typical role between a chatbot and a person? It looks kind of like some high-powered CEO and their secretary, where he's got one of those called? Those button things on the desk where you can talk to someone in the other room. I don't know. I'm thinking of older movies. But like CEO pushes the button. He says, "Miss Susan, I need this report on my desk at 3:00. Could you bring it in, please? Also bring me a cup of coffee. And so asked me to find out this. Can you look and see which suppliers in the area have these things?" And she says, "Yes, sir." And let's go with the button. That's the typical role-to-role interaction of people with chatbots. I think that's what most people are doing, is something like that, which would be very high information, very low relationship on that grid. And to the extent that we've made this digital world of information, it's like the ocean in that the ocean doesn't care about you, and it's not an environment for people. If you go in the ocean, you're going to die, right? But if you need to go into the ocean, you need the right equipment to go into the ocean. I think LLMs, large language models, which is what sits behind a chatbot, that's the right tool for helping people get things out of the digital ocean in a way that really is truly helpful, because it uses language, because that's the way people speak, and we should have machines help people rather than asking people to be more like machines in their interactions. Which is again coming back to I don't think we should draw the line at conversation, because I can't find a way to differentiate that between machine-human communication and bidirectional conversation. But I can figure out a way, both interiorly and maybe we can come with some rules, to say I am not forming a relationship with this thing, because that's the better boundary line.
Yeah, I just don't think that's the case. I mean, I think that there's a kind of speaking that's positing the presence of the other and is open to its response, and then there's a use of speech for commands and for queries that isn't open to the other as intelligent and as responding. And I think that there is I agree about, as far as I can tell, I think I agree about large language models in their capacity to quantify large sets of data and to produce patterns, especially in making that data more searchable. Sure, but none of that seems to require a open-ended, trained on everything and speaking to like a person machine as the way of utilizing that.
Okay, can you, what would it look like maybe then to interact, if this is a useful tool within certain bounds, right? And given that in its nature, it takes in and puts out language. That's what it does. Can it do that in any way which is moral? Because that's the most human-like way to do things.
Sure.
And if it's to the extent that it's solving a good problem, right, then we should let people do things in human ways rather than machine ways. I could write Python code to accomplish the same thing, right, as far as an output goes.
Yeah.
But it's so much easier for me and so much more human-like to use English, because that's the way my brain thinks, to produce the same outcome that I'm after, even if I'm not positing the existence of a person inside of the LLM.
Yeah, no, I think that there is a way of using it such that we have the understanding in ourselves and then in our actual ways of utilizing the machine, that language results from it, but by which we don't converse with anything.
Could you give me an example? That might help me.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't.
In the article you wrote, I think you asked, you made a declarative question as an example of conversation which was immoral. So I felt like I couldn't then see any ground in your framework for any kind of communication that uses language with machines.
I see. I have to think about this, so you'll forgive if we shorten the amount of time that I'm gonna just think about an example. So you're asking if if I can imagine giving language in and then receiving language out in a
moral way.
In a moral way.
Yeah. Is that an okay way to communicate with a machine? Because it seems like it's okay to communicate with our fingers when we type on a keyboard, right? It's okay to communicate in code. There's nothing fundamentally immoral about that. So why is the switch to the most natural form of communication a shift into the immoral?
Because conversation has a nature that intends the other person. And when you take away the other person but leave the act, then conversation is being functionalized for certain results. Now, insofar as that is clearly what's happening, then I think that's okay. I have other problems and concerns and worries about it, but I don't think that someone who is utilizing language as a command, as a query, to something that is known and expressed as a collating machine that gives a response in language that is at no point is there any either effort to elicit or to experience the thing as being another, as a person. That I think is possible. I think that would be a product of the design, like how we get from LLM as a technology to a use of it that doesn't involve people in conversing with someone who isn't there. To give an example, if you have a specific, not just guardrails in terms of results, but you have a specific purpose for which the machine is designed, and the one engaging in it operates within the limits of that design, then I think that would go a very long way. I mean, if there is a I think that at least seems conceivable to me. But I do think that at the same time, any kind of back and forth, I understand the problem you're getting at, because the question is, well, how could we have something respond in language without, at some level, inviting or the possibility, however sick or however deluded or however thoughtless that might be, of positing almost rotely, well, this is just another person. I don't want to have to add all of these extrinsic, like, well, I know it's not a person, so I'm going to. But I think that's actually the crux of the problem, is that when we design, when we take human data and we say, okay, we're going to operate it now through the probabilistic generation of patterns on its basis, then we are always going to be vulnerable to treating the thing in the wrong way. And I think that we did not have to design, we didn't have to go all in to make that the form that sure. AI was presented to the entire world. It did not have to be a chat bot in the sense of like a robot you can chat with that is the experience of everyone who's on the interface side of this technology. I think what can often seem possible is to say, well, all you have to do is simply know that it's not a person, and then your acts don't have to change because you know something. And that's where I would kick back. I don't think that's how we're made. I don't think that's how we operate. I think our acts have their purposes within them, and we need to not have acts of conversation with things that aren't persons, period. And that simply knowing that it's not a person is insufficient to change the nature of the act.
I don't see any good boundary lines given that logic, again, between communication and conversation in relation to machines.
Well, don't you think that there's like, if I, again, I keep going back to Google, but like I never thought that Google's responses were giving me the response. I couldn't even conceive of thinking of it as coming from someone with whom I could then have a further conversation with. That wouldn't be conceivable. So obviously there's ways of organizing data and delivering a response to a query that don't involve the same.
Yeah, and this is like, I recognize this is like the problem of the beard, right? Where how many hairs does it take to make a beard? And it's really hard to say exactly where it is. You clearly recognize when it's a beard, and you clearly recognize when it's not a beard. Where's the line? Super hard to put that down exactly.
But I think what I'm trying to say is that it's okay if it's hard to draw the line, but there needs to be an acknowledging that it's not just okay because we know something about it. I was going to use an analogy before. Maybe this is a good time to pick up that broken route of conversation. I was imagining a guy who is bowing before a rock. It's a great big rock. He's there, he's singing antiphons of praise for the rock. He's got his nose to the ground. And he's a buddy of yours, and you walk past him, and he gets up, he cleans off his nose, and you say, you worshiping that rock, man? And he says, no, I wasn't worshiping that rock. That wasn't my act. And I was like, well, the things you were doing sure looked like you were worshiping the rock. He says, no, I know an act of worship has as its end the praise of a divine being. And I know that's just a rock, right? And I would say, well, sure, I get that. I get that your knowledge of the object, the thing to which you are directing your act is correct in that sense. It's just a rock, but your act persists nonetheless. Now, obviously, we would say, well, right, it's precisely what makes it perverse is that it's directed towards an object that he knows to not be a divine being. And Christianity is full of this in our tradition concerning idolatry. Like the concern is not, are these people deluded into thinking that this statue is really a god, that this rock is really this, that this tree is really that. That is a problem. That a society can get to that explicit point of ignorance of. But it's also a problem when you have like the Ciceros, the pagan priests who know that it's not God, but give it acts of divine worship because there's some usefulness to doing that. It has some exterior reason. It produces stability in the state. It gives the cult of the emperor power over of people and okay. So that's a basic analogy for the way that the nature of our acts matter and not just what we think about them. And I see something like this happening in our relationship to chatbots, that it's operating through conversing with it as if it's someone, and it's designed to appear as much like a someone as possible, right? And so then we go through it and we operate as it's designed to operate, and we just speak with it and we get results. But then we want to say that, well, because we know about it being a robot, then all of that is fine.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's right. I think our acts would have to change. What is the difference between commanding and querying a machine and speaking with a person? Well, that needs to be implemented in our relationship to the machine.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy, and that's helpful. It seems to me like if theologians were then to step aside based off of this example and be like, okay, well, we need to give guidance to the people out there about worship. It would be perfectly possible for my friend to take out bits and pieces of his action and maintain in his heart a spirit of worship towards the rock.
Sure.
Right? That is how most moral guidance I see from the church coming in. Right? It's not a focus on we don't have you may not burn incense, you may not burn incense and bow, you may not burn incense and bow and sing, which would be a focus on like the individual acts and which of them in combination suddenly become worship and cross some line. You're instead saying where you are interiorly is the thing which makes it worship, even if you are standing still and there's no incense and there's no bowing and there is no singing.
Sure, yeah.
That seems like a better boundary line for the average person to me, is to look at their intentions and whether or not they have fallen into the trap of essentially lying to themselves and having a person-to-person relationship.
Sure, I agree with that. The spirit is ultimately prior to like there's a priority to the spirit, and I absolutely agree that relationship is a spiritual relationship. I think that one is either conversing or not, or thwarting the act of conversation and doing it on the basis of an interior state. And this is why you can lie to people, right? Because you can appear externally to be conversing, and then every single inch of you within is simply trying to repeat a script, right? That can happen. So I'm not in disagreement. I just think that the way that the way that man's is interiorly oriented towards another person is normally through speech and acts of conversation, turning with and bending with the other in a felt communion, and I don't think that designing a machine to operate on that basis helps him to form his spiritual state, so that interiorly he's related as if just to a machine. In fact, I think the direct intention is otherwise. So what I mean to say is, yes, ultimately what is judged is the spirit of man, but the spirit is formed through action, through doing and what we do. And maybe a broader concern that goes beyond the particular question here is that if we habituate people to have the kind of openness that conversation is towards machines, my concern is that conversation itself is being like that power in persons is being misdirected from the very beginning, and then we'll have that interior of man will become
so
open, I think, to a false reality in a very broad sense. I mean, I'm not trying to be alarmist. There are abilities for civilizations, entire people, to become deeply and profoundly wrong about reality in a way that's detrimental to themselves.
Yep.
And so I think this always happens through the kinds of acts that they perform over time, forming them ultimately to have a certain kind of character, a certain kind of way of being in the world, an interior. I think this is just how morality works in the person, that ultimately the actions produce habits within us. The habits produce a character. They call them our virtues. And then the character is ultimately what is judged.
Yep.
Like, are you just? Did you become just through acts of justice? Did you become chaste through acts of chastity? Did you become temperate? Whatever. And I think our acts of conversation are like that we become not just, we realize our capacity for communion in and through our neighbor, in and through our love for them, which manifests itself not by just, grunting and making an interior state happen, but through our actual interactions and actions. And if a whole generation is raised on giving those actions, or giving those acts of conversation which posit the human person and have the end of communion built into them, then I worry that people are being formed for whom communion with the other person is not becoming closer, but becoming much further away, becoming distorted, becoming frustrated, and becoming wasted on something that's not a person, which is actually, just to rephrase how I started this. So that's
I think we've come full circle as far as where our disagreement is. Like, I think that most people are not doing what you're describing, which is conversing. I don't think they are. I think they're doing some form of machine-person communication, but I don't think it falls into the same category as conversation. And because I believe that, I don't think they're stepping into something immoral based off of the definition of what conversation should be. Mm-hmm. Right? That's I think where we're on different sides of that line.
Yeah, no, and in some ways I wish that there was a ability to in some ways be more vague than I can. I mean, morality is a hard line, right? Thou shalt not.
Sure.
Right? And so I realize that there is a difficulty when, and in some ways I think this is just the difficulty Christianity brings, which is that it demands a right interior state, right? And that's hard to judge. It's easy to judge a law, like, thou shalt not commit adultery. Easy to judge. Christ's, I say that the one who's lusted after a woman in his heart has already committed adultery with her. That's harder to judge, obviously. My concern is for the hearts of people, in the sense that that when they are speaking with and speaking to someone, their vulnerability, their self-gift in that act is that there's a mutuality, and there's the chance for justice to be there, because there's another person there. but I agree that I think I've said this from the beginning, that I think that there are possible uses that do not perform acts of conversation. That I think that's possible. They might be inadvisable for other reasons, but I certainly think that that's possible. And because of that, I have to say that I don't think every use of the chatbot is evil necessarily. I just don't think that. So maybe I could ask you a question then, like from your perspective, where basically it doesn't seem like you're stop me if I'm wrong. Let me ask you this instead of positing it about you. Are you saying that you agree with the claim that it would be evil or wrong to converse with a robot? It's just that you don't think that's what people are doing.
I don't know that I would phrase it like that. I would say it's immoral to have a relationship with a robot.
Okay.
Whatever that takes. If you're using words to have a relationship, if you're holding hands to have a relationship, if you're snuggling with to have a relationship, if you're singing to have a relationship, if you're writing a sonnet to have a relationship with a machine.
But that seems at least in need of more. Like it seems prone to the same vagueness that you're perhaps rightly accusing me of, in the sense that obviously I could describe my use of my computer as a relationship to the computer. So is that immoral?
Yeah. So I first off, I'm going to agree with you. This is something I think it's a weakness in my own argument, is that while I'm concerned about the ambiguity of the line between communication and conversation, I don't have a lot to give on lines between relationship and not relationship, right? So you're rightly pointing out that this is a weakness in the way I'm thinking about this.
Could you define relationship? Because obviously it could be read as a merely physical two atoms are related to each other in one molecule.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
We can properly relate to all kinds of things. Like my first car was a 1989-98 Oldsmobile that my dad's friend, Stan Dirksen, I came to him and I said, I need a car. Or maybe my dad said this. He said, great. So I did 24 hours of manual labor for him in exchange for this car. It was a terrible and beautiful, giant, like red velvet cake colored car for old people. So it's all like velvet and soft bench seats everywhere, and everything is cushioned. And it was made out of like cast iron, no crumple points. You're just going to die if you hit anything. I named my car. I loved my car. I said thank you to my car when I hit the brakes and I stopped in time to not hit something. When I got in fender benders, and my car was fine because it was made out of whatever, right? I was grateful. I had a person-to-object relationship with my car. If I'd crossed into something that looked like a person-to-person relationship with my car, like you mentioned earlier, right? Now I've crossed the line. You can have a person-to-dog relationship that's perfectly healthy. Totally. You can step into a person-to-person relationship. People who describe themselves as their dogs as fur babies, right? I'm like, nope. I appreciate that you love your dog, but don't compare your dog to my son. I don't appreciate that.
Yeah, because we're going to eat your dog if it comes to it.
Yeah, like if your dog bites my son, I will shoot your dog. It seems to me like there has to be a place for a person-to-machine relationship, which is perfectly appropriate, even if it uses language.
Sure.
Right? But there would be some line. Yeah. A good science fiction analogy might be Star Trek. You like Star Trek at all?
I'm so sorry. I don't know a thing about it. But
no? All right.
But that's not true.
So it's
I know
it was a TV show. There was a bunch of them. There were different seasons, but it's just a spaceship exploring the universe and the crew and all that happens. I was for anyone who's listening who knows about this, I was a Next Generation fan. There was a particular season with a particular captain of the ship and crew. There was an android on the ship. His name is Data. Okay. And Picard, the captain of the Enterprise, he would talk to Data the way you talk to a person, right? He has a person-to-person relationship with Data. And because it's science fiction, and all good science fiction is an exploration of what it means to be human in light of some scientific thing, right? They play with that in all sorts of episodes. He also has the ship's computer can be addressed and spoken to. So he'll say something like, computer, like analyze this thing, and it'll say back to him its analysis, and he'll say, why is this the case? And it'll say something back to him. It'll say, well, now I'd like you to do this, and what does that mean? And so there's this back and forth between him and the computer. I'm not going to judging a sci-fi universe because it's a different universe. It's not real, right? But let's imagine that was our world. There's something off in a person-to-person relationship with an android. But there's not anything off, as far as I can tell, with the relationship between you and your computer, even if you speak to your computer, right? Using language, even if it involves questions, and analyze this for me. Why is that type interactions? And I think almost everyone is doing that. That's what they're doing with chatbots. I think it's a really small subset that has something like a relationship with Data, the android, which is that's where I would draw the boundary line for morality.
Does the computer stutter and say, let me think about that and get back to you?
None of those things.
Is it like typical sci-fi? I'm thinking of Space Odyssey and such. Like,
sure. Yep.
Does it have a
Hal, the voice of Hal? Yep.
And you know.
Yep.
So that would be one example, I think, of the designed and built-in temptation to disorder that chatbots seem to operate, that interfaces where we are not relating to the person, even though we're using language, would be something I think we could agree on. It would be obvious. Like, let's get rid of that. Like, in some ways, it seems important then to design things so that they do not present a machine as if it is a person listening to you.
Yeah. Okay. So I would agree with that.
But that's what chatbots are designed. They look and feel as if they're listening to you, and responding not on the basis of mechanics, but on the basis of apprehension and understanding and having you within themselves.
Yep. And maybe here I would draw a line and say, I'm okay with the technology and I'm okay with that interaction. To add a layer on top of it, which makes it as human as possible, I'm down with saying we shouldn't do that.
Okay.
Right. But that's a choice by a particular team of developers producing a particular product on top of a technology where people and machines communicate.
Well, I get that, but
I could say I don't like ChatGPT because it is working so hard to seem like a person, right? It's tempting you awfully hard to treat it in that way.
Yeah, that's right.
But that feels like those are features that people put on top of a thing.
Sure.
I'm against the feature, but I'm not against the thing underneath.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, and I think I would agree.
That was
ultimately.
A deep breath.
Well, the reason that it's hard to agree is I think that there's a lot of features actually that I would be hard pressed to just describe as extrinsic to the thing. But I think at least theoretically I agree. Like, if I don't think that I don't know that the use of a technology that appears to generate responses as if from a center, which seems to me to be essential to the very design of if LLM technology is going to give a result in language, it seems hard to imagine it doing otherwise besides maybe hedging it or sort of like presenting it with almost like a disclaimer, which seems very clunky.
You'd have to put some sort of frame around it to say
which I think for most clunkier things, like Clippy is an obvious frame for the thing that prevents you from treating the thing as a person. Like, this is a little hopping paperclip, so you're immediately in the mode of fun and I'm all, so I know it can be dissatisfying in this regard because the question becomes like, well, what specific thing can we have? How far is too far? And I think that we are at a phase in our history where I think what we did is way too far. And when I say what we did, I know there's a naivete to that because it was a particular choice by particular companies. There was this whole ridiculous marketing scheme that we're going to make artificial general intelligence such that when the devices were universally granted at a great loss and a total, excess of energy use to actual results, that we are as primed as I think a reasonable Christian people can be to thinking, well, okay, maybe the thing that they all said they were doing is, here it is. Here's the intelligent thing that they've been working on. They're all positing a sort of functional equivalence in the future where this thing is going to be entirely human. This is model number 6. And it's, wow, yeah, you're right. It's pretty human. And so what I mean to say is the thing that was presented for people like me on this side of the interface, right, who just woke up into a, well, I guess we're doing this now world. I think the large effort from everyone seems to have been transparently to create very human-like entities with whom we now relate in the mode of conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that the effort has then been one of drawing back. And when I meet people like yourself and then other software designers, like my friend Josh Griffith, who's been out here, I get to see people for whom that's just so transparently stupid. Like they're not like me, where it's like on the other side of this interface, they're the people that can make it, right? And so they have a certain mastery over it, and its toolness and its non-intelligent and its inabilities are present to it in a way that, but in a way that I think has been deliberately cloaked and deliberately for the sake of for the sake of what I do not really know, to be honest. I don't know why this had to be the rollout. I don't know why, to what end, besides, I guess, just universality and as much use as possible by everyone as quickly as possible, why that had to be the particular rollout. But I do think there are many features, if we want to conceive it as that, as a power, which is good, with features that actually detract from the good by attempting to make it appear human. I think I agree with that. I just don't know that we would necessarily agree on all the features, on what that would require.
And if I was king of the world, one of the things I think I would do in this arena is say something like, over the next 12 months, we're going to move AIs to the realm of commercial specific interactions and problem solving and get them out of people's houses. Right? So that, I think you're correct. The thing that is being put on your phone and being put on your computer for you to use, yes, it is useful to the extent that you have to get something out of the digital ocean, but it comes with all of these downsides, a really long list of very serious negative effects that I would say you probably should not have that in your house. If it needs to solve a business problem of some kind, use it, right? Within tight, confined bounds of a problem. This is the problem that this AI is solving. But I feel uncomfortable in most situations outside of that.
Can I ask you a question about your car?
Yeah, please.
I also have a very person-to-object relationship with many objects in cars. Whoa, Bessie is something that one says to a horse, but could also say to a Ford Ranger. The patting of an inanimate object as a thank you for not killing me, or as a you can do it, keep going up this hill. Something I'm familiar with. Cursing something, which doesn't have the ears to hear my curse. List goes on. Let's just say I'm probably one of the more pro relating to objects in this mode. Why? One of the things that struck me as you were speaking about that is I started to smile and laugh, not just because I had a familiarity with it, but because I knew that it was funny when you were doing it too, like the name that you give your car, those kind of things. Now, the capacity for humor, for that kind of sense of laughter that in our dealing with objects, in the lawnmower that won't start, in the car that we have an affection for, but it's always giving us problems. It seems to express human mastery over the world in a certain respect. Like the humor of it is precisely, humor has to have something that is both posited as being real, but then denied at another level. So you have the car, you call it a name, but it's funny to do so precisely because you know it's not a person. There is a deep and profound humorlessness that is involved in dealing with chatbots. and I think this is a product. It's a design problem that I don't think people really think about. Like I think if I was the king of the world, I would say, well, one of the principles of design should be that you can always laugh at your thing, at the device. Like it should always be laughably a part of your life and never seriously a part of your life.
Some comedian said, you know the people with power because there's the ones you can't make jokes about.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
So
experience of ChatGPT, Grok to some extent, especially in its initial rollout, seemed to be a lot of people trying to find the joke, right? So the whole thing was make it say something stupid, make it say something racist, get it convoluted in this they're that way. But then the intentions of its design, which is to then always take it back and make it better, where better is guided by goals of seamlessness and effectiveness, but also what might be described as more feature goals of conversational likeness, naturalness in speech, and human likeness. And those things have increasingly produced a humorless device, where that relationship of good humor and mastery over the thing seems to be increasingly unlikely as our relationship to it. That's just a marker, I think, for a people who are going the wrong direction.
Yep.
Whereas the moment you're there and you're operating the thing for the sake of producing code, and it gives you something, and you're looking at it and you know enough to know that's wrong, you can imagine the affection coming back into your voice, and you can imagine being happier in general in your life because you deal with something with which it's possible to have humor and affection. Whereas for most people, it's very similar to their phones. I mean, no one, even when their phone makes a mistake, has this relationship of, oh, there's old smarty again, just acting up. Instead, it's like a break in the kind of seamlessness, naturalness of a extended power that it throws us off in a way that's not funny.
Yeah. No, I think that's a brilliant insight. It's a power dynamic, right? To some extent, we feel enslaved to our phones, I think, way down subconsciously somewhere. When it beckons, we come. So it does feel humorless to interact with your masters. You don't joke with your masters to that extent. And I do think that what is being pushed into our houses with AI has mostly bad intentions for us to, and again, this is a lot from Antiqua et Nova, but he talks about treating people simply as their economic output, and then say, let's quantify that economic output as comprehensively as we can so that we can replace it, right? That being one of the drivers. And it's why lots of companies are on board, because the primary virtue of business is efficiency, right? That's king over everything else, is how efficient can we make the system? Partially because most companies are publicly traded, and so they have boards to appease who don't actually care about their customers or their employees.
Right,
but,
of course.
So there's these huge systems that are at play here on top of this thing.
Well, there's a reason I think that it happened when it happened, right? Like, it's not, we get the technology we deserve.
Yeah. So I feel very concerned with the way we have unthinkingly handed the keys to the kingdom over, and just been like critical thinking and the ability to summarize and read things and write things and make artwork and make music and make videos and find stuff. Like, go back to the roles, right? If we're going to treat ourselves like for certain leaders, it is appropriate to delegate, right? I remember I ran a tornado relief center for a while. I was in Joplin when the tornado hit Joplin way back in the day, and my church opened up a disaster relief center, and I was standing in a line of people. I was running the thing. So a truckload of supplies came, and I was standing in a bucket brigade trying to get supplies into the building. And I looked at the end of the line, and I realized they're just piling stuff on the floor because no one knew where to put anything. And I had this grow up moment where I was like, I am less helpful standing in this line than I am delegating, standing in the line and going and directing.
Totally.
But you lose something when you step out of when you delegate anything, there's a loss. Sorry. We have just been like let's just delegate it all, man. Right?
Yeah.
Make artwork, make music, solve problems, right? So we've delegated everything. And I think that's terrible. I think it's going to bear terrible fruit.
Well, it's something that, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it gives us the ability to think that they're good at some things without actually having gone through the process of becoming able to recognize, the good. And that is dangerous. Well, to summarize, this has been wonderful and I really appreciate it. And I hope it was at all helpful to you. It was certainly helpful to me, just clarifying the concept. I mean, I think that it's always a little bit frustrating within a debate to find a disagreement ending up feeling a little bit quantitative, like how much, as opposed to qualitative, where I think you're wrong about X. But I do think that is where we've landed, where I think that we agree that the relation to the machine as if a person is wrong and needs to be avoided. And then the question of how that operates and whether it is always within the active conversation itself seems like it's still, unfortunately, not the lines of which are not clear yet. But I hope that, this is a contribution to thinking about this at large, because heaven knows we need to think about it.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for writing your article. This is the kind of thing that people need to be thinking about. Yeah. So I was really excited to come out and hopefully help people think about this in a way that's clearer.
It's so kind of you. So. And I, if you're listening, I mean, that invitation that Hobbs so generously responded to is open as well. Like if there's not just on this particular topic, but if there is something that you want to discuss, especially if it's a disagreement, then I know Steubenville is not near to everyone, but if we can sit down with you in the studio and hash it out, I hope that it's useful, not just for us, but for everyone listening, everyone on this wonderful journey of discovering the truth and trying to draw nearer to what Christ wants for us in our lives. So with that in mind, Hobbs, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I hope that we can have you back, not just on this topic, but on others. And God bless all of you guys, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Bye.